Thank you. We'll move to Mr. Champoux for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Professor Geist, I have another question for you. My party, the Bloc Québécois, tabled a bill that suggests, well, it came after a protest where Adil Sharkawi had very violent remarks, inciting people to violence, calling for the elimination of Canada and the United States, but also Israel. So in the aftermath of all this, we proposed a modification to the criminal code to remove the criminal, the religious exception from the criminal code, because this religious exception allows an individual who is uttering remarks under the guise of their religious beliefs to say things that would go beyond what's reasonable. So this bill, would it encroach upon the freedom of expression or the freedom of religion according to the reading of things that you have done, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Criminal Code?
Well, thanks for that. I think the answer is yes, it would, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a non-starter. And as we've heard, there is a balancing act to be had when it comes to all of the rights. And in a sense, that's built into our charter. I mean, we heard earlier that is a hallmark of the Canadian approach, that these rights aren't absolute, and there is a need to balance. And so balancing freedom of religion, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, some of the other, and association, some of those other rights are always going to be a challenge. And where there may be people who use some of these rights to engage in conduct that quite clearly is not just harmful in terms of what's being said, but has had real world impact in terms of the safety of kids going to school or people going to their synagogues. There is a need to act. We've seen some of that. We saw that, for example, with Samudan fairly recently, which was also some of their people involved in some of these kinds of protests. But after more than a year of these experiences and this massive increase in targeting communities, in my case, particularly the Jewish community, there is a need to act.
Est-ce que vous pensez que...
Do you think that this article of the criminal code, this exception, should it have even existed in the first place, or and people feel a bit more free to express these kinds of opinions? I mean, maybe this is what is leading us to make the changes we talked about.
Yeah, no, listen, I don't know the history of the inclusion of that particular provision, but I suspect it was based on a vision of a robust protection for freedom of religion and a recognition that there was potential risks of a chill in terms of that ability to practice if we were seen to criminalize certain kinds of speech. But at the same time, if that is used as a safeguard or as a mechanism to get to engage in hateful conduct, then surely we have to consider how to address that kind of conduct, that religion doesn't provide a sort of a blank to allow people to say anything, especially when it creates some of these kinds of harm.